If you have a Bible and you like to follow along, please turn in it to Proverbs chapter 22. This is where we're going to spend our time today. Proverbs 22. I don't know how you all look at the culture, but there are several features about modern life and modern people that I think are really lacking. It's so interesting to me and sad what people are willing to sell their souls for. There are people young teenagers and young adults who are willing to put things online of themselves that are going to last forever. I don't know if you know much about the internet, but the internet was crafted so that communication could be maintained in the event of a nuclear holocaust. That's what the whole thing's for. It's a military creation. And that means that even if half the net goes down, some picture of myself or yourself or someone else that's been posted online is going to last forever. Somebody's going to see that thing. There are people who will post things online, pictures and things like that of themselves that are absolutely terrible. How many young girls post naked pictures of themselves online? Those pictures are going to be there forever. Their children, if they have them, are going to grow up and possibly see them. And then that's just that. Then we've got Hollywood, where people are willing to get on a screen in front of a camera and have sex in front of a camera. Those movies are going to be around forever. Who would want to explain that to their children? Look, there's mom. Look, there's dad. What are you doing? Wait a minute. That woman that dad's with's not my mom. Look what he's doing with her. This is incredible to me. The Bible tells us that there's something that's of greater value than wealth, and that is a good name. What does it mean to have a good name, and what does it mean for you and I, who are followers of Jesus, to have a good name? Let's take a look at the text. I'm going to read some scattered verses. I'll call them out, Proverbs 22, and I'll call the verses out. The first two are the verses 1 and 2. A good name is to be chosen rather than great wealth. Good favor is more important than silver or gold. The rich and the poor meet together. The Lord is the creator of them both. In verse 8, the one who sows iniquity will reap trouble. The rod of their fury will come to an end. A generous person, though, will be blessed, for they give some of their food to the poor. And then verse 22, do not exploit a poor person because they are poor. Do not crush the needy in court, for the Lord will plead their case and will rob those who are robbing them. The theme here seems to me to be, and if you read the whole proverb, of course there's a lot of theology in Proverbs 22. We don't have time to go into it today, but if you read the whole thing, you will see a common theme throughout all of the verses, and that is that it matters how we live in the world. It matters whether or not we have a good name. Now, that makes sense, right? It's almost like let's close in prayer. We're kind of done here. You want a good name. Everybody understands that. I don't think that's a mystery to anybody. But then again, this proverb has a certain tension within it. One of those tensions is, if you go down to verse 6, which you can go there if you want, it says, train a child up in the way that they should go, and when they're older, they'll not depart from it. The translation is really a little shaky there. It really should read, it'll not depart from them. However, that is not a promise. That is not a promise. I know people in my own circle of friends, followers of Jesus, raised their children up in the way they should go, faithfully, and their children became wayward, and their children have not returned. Now, I don't know what that means except to say this. What it tells me is Proverbs are there as godly advice, and we would do well to heed that advice. But it doesn't mean that just because we do everything right, it's all going to go well. Doesn't mean that at all. I remember a while back, when I first became a believer, there was a person on television, famous person, Christian, author, owner of a network on television who has a doctorate. And I thought, well, I can learn something from this person. I'm a brand new believer. What do I know? Nothing. And so I would take in what this person taught. Well, they wrote a book. One of the books gave the rules for the universe. And I thought, wow, who doesn't want to know the rules for the universe? I want to know the rules for the universe. I want to live my life as a Christian. I'm a new Christian. I want to follow the rules for the universe. Makes perfect sense to me. Listed all these Bible verses, a lot of Proverbs. Turns out as I got a little older, I realized these rules for the universe are not like a vending machine. I put 3/4 in, the digital numbers show 75 cents, and the potato chips fall out. That is not how the universe works at all. And I think we all know that. I think everybody's aware of that. The Proverbs are not to be read that way. And if you read them that way, if we do, then we're going to find ourselves disappointed. Talk to the parents of children who become utterly wayward and never come back, who they really tried hard to raise their children up in the way that they should go. It's kind of like Ecclesiastes. You've got Proverbs and Ecclesiastes are books that have a large amount of what I would call good, solid, secular advice, right? Just do these right things and you'll have a better life. I believe that totally. And I believe something else too, that if a person comes to Jesus and their life is a shambles, when they get born again, God is going to help them live a better life. There's no doubt about that. Anybody in this room here who's a believer would testify to that. I surely would. I mean, I know what I was like before I was born again. So it's offering us advisements for good, sober living, but there's more. It's offering us something else too, and that's this. And this is where it touches you and me as believers. We live lives that to a large extent are, or should be, accountable. Accountable. Accountable is a funny word. A person who lives accountably is living in relationship with other people in a way that they have to make an account to the other people. In other words, our lives, what we do, what we say, how we act, other people are involved in that, and we become accountable to them in some way. A person who is willing to be accountable in a relationship is a person who is very open. They're open. They're willing to be seen for who they are, and they're willing to be known deeply. I remember somebody right here in this congregation years ago, it's literally years ago, said to me, "Oh, I am just an open book. What you see is what you get." That's not true. It's just not true, right? First of all, anybody who declares that is telling me that the declaration is wrong. If I have to, let me give you an example. If I have to declare to you that I'm an athlete, great athlete, then there's something wrong right away. If I can't show it to be so, then why am I bothering to declare it? I'm declaring it because I want you to think I'm a good athlete, right? So the person who says, "Oh, I'm just an open book, what you see is what you get," they want me to think that. But I know it's not true. I know it's not. Every person lives in front of other people in the way that they would like to be seen. All of us do that. Now, if a person lives that way very openly and accountably, why would they do that? It's because their character is such that they don't have a whole lot to hide. That's why they would live that way. I have known people like that in my life. I know some right now who are like that. They live openly. They're making mistakes just like you and me. They don't declare things about themselves. They just live. And they live in front of me and others in an accountable way that allows them to be seen. That's a big deal. People who we would say are just comfortable in their own skin. Now, this idea of accountability is where I want to funnel this down to you and me as followers of Jesus. Because to live an accountable life is to live like Jesus. If we're willing to be accountable to each other, if we're willing to be accountable, that means that we're willing to be seen. And it also means that we're willing then to work to live as Jesus lived. Let me explain that. If a person is free in their character, in being accountable, if they're allowing others to know them, that's because they don't really see themselves as having any reason to hide anything from anybody. Maybe there's a reason there, maybe they should be fearful, but they don't have that fear. They're just willing to be themselves in front of everybody. That is exactly the way Jesus was all the time. Jesus said, he said it. Now imagine yourself saying this. Jesus says, he asks the Jews who were gathered there in front, and the whole crowd, he says, who among you can prove me guilty of sin? That's a big question. I mean, I would never ask that because I know everybody just raised their hand and say, I remember something you did, Rip. I remember, something you said. Jesus says, if I'm telling you the truth, why don't you believe me? The one who belongs to God listens to me and responds to God's words. And then he looks at him and says, but you don't listen and respond because you don't belong to God. I'm thinking, wow, Jesus could just say stuff like that, right? But I can't. I can't say that. I'm full of all kinds of things I don't want you to know about. I don't want you to know about them. What is it? What's the implication? The implication is Jesus' good name is unassailable. It's unassailable. You can know everything about Jesus and you cannot find any place where you could accuse him of anything. None of us can say that. But in practical terms, this is where it comes back to the Proverbs we just read. In practical terms here on this earth, it is limitedly achievable. We can be upright people, and we can be accountable, and we can be known. This is one of the reasons for the church. Because it places us in a crucible where we have to be allowing ourselves to be known over time. It's just the way it is. We're accountable to each other. I've been called out here. I've had somebody call me out for something that I did and said that was wrong. And those kinds of things happen in here. They're supposed to happen in here. If you want to know something about accountability, get married. That's all you got to do. Just get married. You'll know something about accountability right quick. Because being one flesh gives you far less places to hide out than you would otherwise have. Far less. That's engineered by God to be that way. Right? Because we're supposed to be accountable. All of us. To each other, to our spouses, to our children, to our friends, in this church. Think about it and just, what does the Bible say about marriage? It says, and the two shall become one flesh. Well, gee whiz. I mean, there's not a lot of space you can hide in that. The other person, your spouse, is going to know, right? They're going to know what's good about you, what's wrong about you, what needs to be adjusted about you. That constant friction is good for us because it rubs the sharp edges off as we go through life in a married couple. But it means something else too. That good name means a lot once children become part of the picture. Oh boy. Our children will either see a good name or they will see the opposite. Most of them are going to see a mix, if we're honest, right? But I'll tell you, that good name really means something when children are around, and it can mean something in here too, because there are some things that can't be taught. They can only be caught. If I am a wayward person and a child grows up in my care as a father, then I need not expect that child to not be wayward. Why should I expect the child to not do what I'm doing? I grew up in the household of an alcoholic. It can happen. But that's where God has to do something supernatural. No use telling the child not to do things if I myself am wayward. No point. Because it'll work when they're 3 and 4. When they're 12 and 13, it won't work. And they'll see right through it. I mean, this is where, in Paul, last week, we looked at it in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, where Paul says that he is building something. How is he building it? He's building it on his good name. The people in that church in Corinth who knew Paul, who knew that Paul was a trustworthy person, who knew that Paul loved the Lord, who knew that Paul would tell them the truth always. And he's building, and those things will last. But you know, you can build something on the basis of a bad name, and here on this earth it'll last too. The bad name will produce just as much fruit as the good name here on the earth. So accountability is so practical, but it means so much. And it's such a funny word when you think about it. I mean, accountable. I go to an accountant. We take all our records to an accountant. To do what? To make an accounting for all of our finances through the year, to make us accountable to the government to pay the taxes that we owe. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. We are opening, when we're in an accountable relationship, we are opening ourselves up to scrutiny to each other, to make an account for who we are in that relationship. And we become visible. And I'll tell you, that's important. It is so important. It's important in every relationship. It's especially important in marital relationships. And it's very important in our relationship to God. Now, I know there are no secrets with God. You know that too. However, it seems to me that God, even though it says in the letter to the Hebrews, says no creature is hidden from God. Everything is naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must render an account. So there it is again, you know, that word. That's true, but you know, there are a lot of believers who don't like that notion. There are a lot of unbelievers who surely don't like it. I remember hearing Christopher Hitchens before he died, when he was still with us, saying this idea that this being is watching over us all the time, like this benign, as he said it, celestial dictator. He said it's like I'm in celestial North Korea with this being watching everything I do and say. For him, it was very unwanted, right? The scrutiny, the accountability with God, he did not want that. Your reaction to that and my reaction says a lot about who we are. If my reaction to God, knowing everything about me, no matter what it is, no matter what I'm trying to hide from you, God knows about it. If my reaction to that is one that says, I don't really like that, then I have to go back and say, have I passed the test? Am I even really a believer? That's kind of scary. Do I believe enough? Do I trust God enough that I can allow myself to be accountable to God in the relationship I have with him, such that I'm feeling really good about him knowing everything about me? That's a big question. That answers a lot in terms of our relationship to God. Is the scrutiny wanted or is it unwanted? Seems to me to be very concomitant with passing the test as to whether I belong to him or not. And this is said in the context of us in terms of the way in which we live publicly. And it's ultimately, of course, God that's going to see us and weigh us, but that doesn't erase the fact of the importance of being accountable to each other as we live. Paul says it well. Each of us will give an account to God. That's what he says in Romans. And either God can be fully trusted. Do you think to yourself, don't answer the question, just think to yourself, do you fully trust God knowing that he knows everything about you and about me? And then the second part of this text today that I get from it, the second feature of it is, you notice that God seems very concerned about the weak in the text. Very concerned about the poor and the weak. That's important. Paul says something to us in 1 Corinthians 13, and you all know this text. It's the one that gets read at every wedding. You know, every wedding. You can't do a wedding if you're doing a Christian wedding without reading some of love. What does love do? What's love like? Paul tells us what love is like. We love all of the things about love that Paul says about love. We love that. Every bit of it. And we love quoting it. But you'll notice something about all those features. If you read them, you'll notice that they're every one of them relational. They're none of them just talking about fuzzy feelings that we might have in isolation. All of those things about what love is are relational things. There's an interaction being implied. That tells me something about the human condition. It tells me that we are built to be in relationship. We're built for it. And that relationship will show other people who we are over time. And the closer those relationships get, the more they're going to see. And so within that public living, we will generate a good name or not. But boy, I'll tell you, when it comes to those people who are vulnerable, the weak, the poor, the children, those who are watching, or those who don't believe, how we live that good name out makes a huge difference for them. They're going to either look at our lives and they're going to accuse God, or they're going to look at our lives and be drawn to Him. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I said anything about which you've got